For our next exercise, we're going to be exploring transitions. In motion graphics, taking your viewer from idea to idea or shot to shot is an essential skill. The first thing I'm going to do is make a new composition. I'm going to go to my little new composition icon down here at the bottom, and I'm going to call this one Transitions. And I'm going to make my width and height 1280 by 720. I'm going to make the pixel aspect ratio square pixels, the frame rate 30, and I'm going to make this duration a full 30 seconds. Even though I might not use all of it, I'll have the ability to just cut it down, but I'll give myself a little breathing room here. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is make my layers. So I'm going to go up to the Shape Builder tool and select my ellipse. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag out, so I'm going to get my shape. And I'm going to align this with my Align menu and Control-click on the object to go to Transform, Center Anchor Point in Layer Content. I'm going to rename this by clicking on the text of the layer, pressing Return, and calling this Circle. Now, a shortcut to make a new layer, a new shape layer, is just to click off this onto the timeline. And I'm going to select another tool here in the rounded rectangle tool in the Shape Builder. And this time I'll make it a different color, so maybe a blue rectangle. I'm just going to hold down Shift and drag out. And you can see, because I didn't have it selected, now I've made a new shape layer. So instead of going up here and making your new layers, that's a good shortcut. Align this, Control-click on it, and center anchor point in layer content. And they should be roughly the same size for now. It doesn't have to be exact, but in the same ballpark. I'll rename this one Rectangle. All right, so I've got a circle, a rectangle, and now I'm going to draw another shape. So click off of your layers, so they're not selected, and then go up to my Shape Builder and hit the Poly tool. I'll make this one, you can make them any color you like, but I'll make this one red, and I'll press Shift and drag out. Now again, I'm going to align the shape. It's roughly the same size, and I'm going to go to Transform, Center Anchor Point. And I'm going to actually go into the Polystar and turn it into a triangle by going into the points and turning that into 3. Rename this. So now I've got these 3 shapes that last the whole 30 seconds, which I obviously don't need. So let's just make them all 1 second long. So if I go to click on the time stamp here in the composition window, I'm going to hit 1 second to type it in. Box select all 3 layers, and I'm going to hold down Option and click bracket out. So now they're all just 1 second. The first transition we're going to work with is the hard cut. Now this is the most obvious cut. It's the least seamless of the cuts. It just goes from one object to the next. So it's very straightforward. So all we're going to do is just space these out. So let's zoom in a little bit here so I can get a little closer. I'll put my key, I'll start with a circle, and I'll put my playhead to the end of the key. I'll put my playhead to the end of the layers by pressing O, so that's a good key command for out. And I'm going to drag each of these out. And I'll hold down Shift so that right at the end of each one, it snaps too. So if you hold on Shift as you're dragging, it just snaps. Right? So now I get hard cuts, no spaces in between them, right? So let's just preview that. Zoom out. You have your first transition. Very straightforward, but a hard cut is a really good way to get from one thing to the next. Let's work on the next one. I'll start my next transition at that 3:15 mark, right? So I'll start my play area there, just extend it out a little bit. I'm going to select my triangle, shift select my rectangle and my circle, and I'm going to copy and paste. And the order I've selected them actually matters, because if I press Command C and Command V, they'll actually come in the same order. If I had done it the other way around, they would have been upside down. So now I've got 3 new objects. They're the same object, but they're 3 new layers that I can animate. And in order to separate them a little bit, what I'm going to do is actually click on this little color icon here next to the layer, and I'm going to change the color. So it doesn't matter what color, but just as long as they look a little different, right, than the last ones, right? And as you highlight them, you can see that in the composition window, you see a different, that the points are a different color as well. They match that color. So like in here, you have blue, and now you have yellow. So it's helpful just to keep everything separated visually in your timeline. All right, so the next transition we're going to work with is a dissolve. This should be quite familiar to you as well, in that we have one object fading into the next. And for that, we're going to select all 3 layers. I'm going to go to the end of the first one, and I'm just going to drag it out. I'm just going to go move my playhead 10 frames ahead and just drag everything out to that mark. So now I've got these little overlaps. So if I zoom in here, I've got a 10 frame overlap. And I'm going to go into my transform menu here and find opacity, right? Now, an easy way to just see opacity is to press T on your keyboard. That shortcut just gives you that one line to look at, so it's pretty easy. So let's do this. Let's go into our first opacity layer, and I'm just going to select the first 2 because I want to just put keyframes on those layers for now. And by selecting both, if I press opacity stopwatch, I get keyframes on both. And I'll press O on just the circle, and I'll select the rectangle as well now, and then put another keyframe there. So now, if I want to adjust just single keyframes, what I can do here is just double-click on the keyframe and get a number box I can just put in 0. So now this one fades out, right? And I've got to fade this one in. So that'll be 0. So it goes 100 to 0, and then the next layer is 0 to 100. So now I get a fade, which is quite nice, right? I'll do the same thing, moving my playhead forward to the start of this last keyframe, the triangle, and I'll press I for the first frame. And then I'll also select the rectangle because I want to put a keyframe there. I will press O for out on the rectangle, put another keyframe there, and again, right over top of that keyframe, I'm going to hit another opacity keyframe for triangle. Now, all of the keyframes are over top of one another, they're exact same points, so you get an even fade in, fade out. Now, I mean, some fades adjust differently, but for the time being, let's just make them right over top of each other. That'll be the clearest way to get a good dissolve from one to the next. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to double click on my keyframes individually to get my fade out. So I'm going to make that one 0, and I'll make the start 0 for the triangle. So now let's preview that. If I just move my playhead forward till about there, and press N for end, and I'll just zoom out so we can get a view of the whole animation. Perfect. And one other thing I might want to do is just put a dissolve in, right? Opacity in here. So I'll make another keyframe at the beginning and move my playhead forward, pressing Command, holding down Command and pressing my arrow keys. and I'll fade it in. So this keyframe here should be 0. Maybe a fade out here, just to be consistent. And I'll use my back command and my back arrow key to go back 10 keyframes apart. I'll make this one 0. So that looks pretty good. Let's just see what that looks like. Great, I've got a fade in. I've got dissolves from one object to the next, and I've got a fade out. For the next set of transitions, let's work on the wipe. I'm going to select my triangle, shift select my rectangle and my circle, and I'll go top down again. And I'm going to copy and paste by Command C and Command V on a Mac. And I'm just going to push those layers forward. Just as a little gap between the animations, I'm going to again change the color here. So I'll make this one like a pink. All right, so now they look different. And I'm going to move all of this play area over so I can see that. Now I've got keyframes on these which are dissolved, so I'm just going to take that off by hitting T on the keyboard. And just going to make sure that all of them are off. And I'll just make sure that everything is 100%. So now, okay, so now I've got these. Now they're over top of one another, so now I've got this 10 frame overlap, which I can use for my next transition, which is the wipe. All right, so I'm going to make backgrounds for these. So that's the next step. So I'm going to go up and make a layer new solid, or press Command Y on your keyboard. But here's where it lives, and so I'm going to press the solid, and I'm going to make different colors for these. So let's make a kind of, the gray looks pretty good, right? Just to give us a different feel for the background. And I'm going to move this gray solid just below my circle, because it's going to be the background for my circle. Now to trim this, I'm going to click on my circle layer, press I on my keyboard for the in point of that layer, click on the solid, hold down Option, and my bracket in key. Likewise, click on the circle again, press O for out, and I'm going to click on my gray solid, Option, bracket, out. So now I've got that background. Let's zoom in here. Make sure they're both all, yes, they look pretty good. I just want to make sure they're all the same level. And I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to now just do it on my keyboard, Command Y for a new solid layer. And for the blue one, what should we do here? The blue one, let's make like a, make a white background. And again, do the same thing. And then repeating that. Command Y, cyan color, put it right below the triangle. Press I for in, Option bracket, O for out, Option bracket, out. All right, so this is kind of what I've got here, right? So I've got some backgrounds in this, right? So we're going to animate these a little differently. So it's called a wipe, meaning that the whole screen kind of pushes, one screen pushes another screen off, right? So the whole screen kind of wipes itself, like a wipers on a car windshield. So that's kind of the effect. So to do that, what I'm going to do here, I want to move both of these layers together, right? I don't want to just move the solid or move the background and not the shape, or vice versa. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do something called a pre-composition. So I'm going to select both layers, my circle and my gray solid. I'm going to control click on both and just hit the pre-compose item here. I'm going to call this wipe circle. So now I've got this as one layer, right? Now you can still edit it by clicking on that, and it opens up and you can make any changes you want. You could change the color of the circle. You could change anything. It's reflected back in transitions. So the power of these is that you end up getting multiple layers that you can actually look at and transform globally. So I'm going to first have this come in, right? So let's do a wipe as it comes in. So for that, I'm going to use position, right? And I'm going to click on position and hold down Control to separate the dimensions. This way I can actually control X and Y separately. And I'll just press P on my keyboard so I can just see just the position keyframes. I'm going to just alter the X position for now. So I'm going to hit a keyframe to start. I'm going to advance my playhead 10 frames just so I can get that wipe in. And I'll press my diamond key here to get another keyframe. Now, I'll go back to the beginning and just drag this off screen. So I'll go do it numerically here. I'll go minus 750. So bring it off screen, bring it on screen, right? So that's basically a wipe on, right? So it comes on, right? Wholesale. The whole thing comes on. I'm also going to make this easy ease keyframes, so that'll be a natural slow in, slow out. So I'll box select them, Control click, go to Keyframe Assistant, easy ease. You can also hit F9 on a Mac, which is function F9. So now they kind of glides on, and it's a little softer of a ramp up, ramp down, right? Then for this next one, I'm going to leave them, I'm not going to make them a pre-composition for now. And what I'm going to do is just select both of them. So I've got the white solid and the rectangle here. I'm going to go into P for position. I'm going to Control click on position, separate those dimensions again. And you can see now I can affect both at the same time by having them selected, right? Both selected. So if I made a keyframe on the Y position, say, now both keyframes happen. I'm going to advance my playhead 10 frames, and I'm going to hit another Y. So this is a good way of creating keyframes on multiple layers. I'll press U on my keyboard just to see those keyframes. I'll go back to the beginning, and I'll have this one come from the bottom. So let's do that. So I'm going to drag both of these to the bottom. I will shift select, press function F9. So now let's preview that. So now I'm getting these wipes, right? Coming from different parts off screen. So you can go left to right into the screen, and then from the bottom. It works very well. It's very dynamic to have different kinds of motion, right? So if you want a super dynamic animation, then having, left to right, right to left, up, down, all the directions. For my last transition, I'm going to do a different kind of wipe, meaning for these ones, one just comes on and replaces the other, right? But let's connect these layers. So I'm going to select both of my rectangle and white solid. I'm going to extend them all the way so that they meet flush with the end of my next set of layers, right? Which is the triangle and the cyan, right? And from here, what I'm going to do, so now I've got both of them in, right? I'm going to take the cyan and the triangle, and I'm going to move them position-wise, so position, those two layers over just to the flush to the edge, right? So now you'll see the effect we get. We'll basically have them be connected. So let's zoom in a little bit here. I want to make sure I'm super, super flush with the edge there. Looks pretty good. And I'll just view this at 33. There we go. So I can see that one is next to the other. Now to control all of my layers with one layer, I'm going to use something called a null layer or a null object. So let me show you what that means. So I'll go up to Layer, New, Null Object. Now this is an empty layer, so I'm going to make it a different color so I'm not getting confused here. I'll make it an aqua color. And I'm going to make it run from the start of the first rectangle. So Option, bracket in, to the end of the triangle. I'll click on it, Option, bracket out. So now I've got this empty layer. You can see there's nothing on it. It has no information, but what it does is it has a transform menu. So in this transform menu, I can actually parent it or connect it to other layers and have it globally control all those layers. So another way of grouping your layers together, right? So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to select all of the layers I want to control with this null layer. So those 4. I'm going to go to this parent link menu and find my null layer. So now you can see it's changed here. I've got it's controlled by this null layer. And if I go into my position here, I'll just separate the dimensions on the null layer. You can see that both are controlled. So they kind of slide in and out. So let's animate this. This overlap here, I'm going to take my X position, and then 10 frames, I'm going to bring it all the way in. So I'm going to do this numerically, but I think minus 750, something like that. Oh, too far. Bring it in. You have to be pretty precise with these ones, right? Because I've got a black background there that I don't want to see. So let's zoom in here. Looks pretty good. All right, so let's preview that then. I'll just fit to frame here. So now let's add an out. So maybe I'll add the Y position now. Add 2 keyframes. The N keyframe, maybe I'll raise it up. Now these keyframes here, I'm going to make them easy ease keyframes. So I'll press function F9. And I'm going to go into my graph editor now and look at this position. So the first one is the X position. I'll just select it and click on my graph editor icon. And I'll make sure all of this is in view. And with my selection tool, I'm going to hit my keyframes. And in here, I can stretch these out a little more, but I can also do a little overshoot and anticipation here. So now, if I adjust, right, that little, there's a little kind of swell and drop here in each one of them. So if you look at this, it kind of will actually overextend, and it'll anticipate and actually overextend at the end here, depending on my keyframe. So let's just look at that, just that last part of the animation. So now it kind of bounces into frame. I get a little anticipation. Just by overextending my Bezier curve in the graph editor.